The room at Balmoral was suffocating, though the windows were thrown open. The Scottish wind blew through the high, narrow corridors, carrying with it a sense of foreboding that even the seasoned palace staff could feel. The Queen's passing had been solemn, expected in its inevitability, yet shocking in its immediacy. And now, the family was gathered to hear the final words of a monarch whose discretion had always been as legendary as her reign. But nothing could have prepared anyone for what came next. Before we continue, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell for updates. Princess, and usually the calmest among the royals, stood before the gathered family, a simple envelope in her hands. Her expression betrayed nothing, but her eyes, sharp and calculating, hinted at the gravity of what she was about to reveal. As she cleared her throat, a hush fell over the room. Even the most senior courtiers, veterans of decades of royal protocol, seemed caught off guard by the atmosphere. It wasn't just mourning anymore. There was something electric in the air, a tension so thick it could be cut with a knife. And then she spoke. According to Her Majesty's final will, Princess, and began, her voice steady, there is a confidential family archive, entrusted solely to Prince William. The words landed like a thunderclap. Whispers erupted around the room, but Princess and continued, unyielding, giving the silence space to settle and let the words sink in. Harry, sitting across from his brother, felt his stomach tighten. Meghan's hand found his arm, a nervous anchor against the storm of emotions building around them. But there was no comfort in it. Only the realization that something monumental had shifted in the family dynamic, a shift so sudden and so deliberate it left them both trembling. The archive. A secret legacy, the Queen's most personal treasure, now explicitly in William's hands. And the weight of its omission struck Harry like a physical blow. He had anticipated disappointment, perhaps, but never this. Never being excluded from a chamber of family secrets that had been hidden from the world for decades. A chamber meant for those who the Queen trusted implicitly. Why him? Why now? These questions ran through his mind, unspoken but palpable. Meghan's mind raced too, calculating, strategizing, already thinking of ways to control the narrative before the media could spin it. But there was nothing to spin, not yet. The Queen had been meticulous in her secrecy, and Princess, and ever the loyal executor of protocol, ensured that every word, every pause, carried its intended weight. Every eye in the room was on Harry and Meghan, and the tension between public composure and private panic was almost unbearable to witness. Have you ever been in a room where a single sentence changes everything you thought you knew about your life? Imagine that, decades of family history, loyalty, and expectation, all condensed into a single, shocking revelation. And yet, the story wasn't just in the words. It was in the pauses, the glances, the subtle but telling shifts in posture. William, composed as always, didn't flinch. He understood the significance of what he was receiving. The Queen's most private possessions, her personal legacy, handed to him with deliberate care. And as the murmurs subsided, one thing became painfully clear. This was no accident. The exclusion of Harry from this intimate part of the Queen's legacy was deliberate, intentional, and calculated. Princess and had read the words, but the implication carried far beyond the envelope in her hands. It was a silent verdict, a family judgment made without ceremony, but no less binding. And the ripple effects would be felt for years to come. As the room slowly adjusted to the gravity of the moment, the staff moved cautiously, mindful of the weight of the Queen's final wishes. In corridors adjacent, secretaries and aides exchanged nervous glances, wondering how the news would leak to the public. For Harry and Meghan, every second was a battle between shock and strategy. Should they react? Should they remain composed? Every option seemed fraught with risk, every move under scrutiny. It wasn't just a matter of inheritance or personal feelings. The Queen's archive wasn't merely a collection of papers, letters, or mementos. It represented authority, discretion, and the silent power of history itself. To be entrusted with it was to carry the weight of a nation's monarchy on one's shoulders. To be excluded was to be publicly and privately reminded of one's precarious position, a subtle but devastating statement of familial hierarchy. And yet, there was more than tension here. There was a story within a story, The Queen had always been careful, deliberate, strategic. Every member of the family had known that trust was earned, loyalty measured in years and deeds. But this was unprecedented. And it was not just the exclusion of Harry that stunned everyone. It was the very nature of the archive itself. Hints of letters, personal notes, diaries, and possibly recordings suggested a level of intimacy with the Queen's thoughts and feelings that no outsider, not even Harry, could have imagined. Can you imagine reading a letter from your mother, your grandmother, or someone you revered, only to find yourself missing from the most critical pages? That was Harry's reality now, and Meghan, always alert to optics and opportunity, saw it immediately. But there was no room for hasty moves. Every glance, every whispered conversation could carry consequences. Every move was calculated, every expression scrutinized. This wasn't a simple matter of hurt feelings. It was a calculated orchestration of legacy. A reminder that family, even royal family, operates on rules often invisible to outsiders but fiercely enforced internally. And as the room waited, holding its collective breath, one thing was certain. The repercussions would not remain private for long. Media outlets, insiders, and even casual observers would begin speculating, analyzing, and theorizing. Every detail, every pause, every whispered word could become evidence in the court of public opinion. And yet, the full weight of what the Queen had done wasn't even apparent to the assembled family. Because the archive wasn't just a collection of personal items. It was a record of discretion, trust, and historical insight. A collection that could reshape how the monarchy was viewed, how family members were judged, and even how the public perceived the balance of power among the heirs. William held not only the items themselves, but the control over how, when, and if any of their contents would ever be shared. Harry, on the other hand, had nothing but questions and a growing sense of exclusion that no title or public position could mitigate. So here they sat, in a room heavy with history and tension. The air seemed to thicken with every passing second. And though the Queen had passed, her presence, her authority, and her meticulous planning were more alive than ever. Every glance William gave was measured. Every expression Harry tried to maintain was fragile. And Meghan, sensing both danger and opportunity, leaned slightly forward, whispering, questioning, planning. What would Harry do next? How would Meghan maneuver? And perhaps most importantly, what secrets did this confidential family archive hold? Secrets that had been withheld from him, from the public, from history itself. The tension in the room was unbearable, yet no one moved. The Queen's final act of discretion had left an indelible mark on the family, one that would not fade with time. And as the camera of imagination pans across that room, one last thought hangs in the air. The archive itself is more than just a collection of objects. It is power, leverage, and a silent message that only the most trusted heir would carry forward. Harry and Meghan had glimpsed the edges of it, and the implications were staggering. But what came next would change everything, and no one saw it coming. The room was colder than anyone had expected, though the fire in the hearth crackled and sent orange light dancing across the portraits lining the walls. Shadows of past monarchs, their eyes eternally watching, seemed to lean forward as Princess and took her place at the front. She held a single envelope in her hands, unassuming in appearance, yet containing words that could shake the very foundations of the royal family. Everyone knew what a reading of the Queen's last will meant, but no one, not even Harry, expected this. The silence was almost tangible. Courtiers shifted nervously, glances darting between the siblings. William sat upright, composed, face impassive. But Harry's jaw tightened, his fingers fidgeting in his lap. Meghan's hand found his, a small gesture of solidarity. Yet her eyes betrayed curiosity and calculation. This wasn't just grief. It was tension, anticipation, a moment that would redefine relationships, power, and perception within the royal household. Princess and cleared her throat. According to Her Majesty's final will, she began, her voice precise and commanding. There is a confidential family archive, entrusted solely to Prince William. The words hung in the air. Shock rippled across the room like a wave, subtle yet undeniable. Whispers stirred, quick and quiet, but deliberate. Harry's eyes widened. Meghan's lips pressed into a tight line, betraying a flicker of panic. For a moment, no one moved. Even the older, seasoned members of the staff. Those who had seen decades of royal transitions were caught off guard. The announcement wasn't just unexpected, it was deliberate. Harry had been excluded from what could only be described as the Queen's most intimate legacy. Every detail of her life she had carefully documented. Every secret she had preserved for the trusted heir would be in William's hands. And for Harry, that meant absence, a stark reminder that he no longer held the same position of trust within the family. How does one react to being deliberately left out of something so personal? Harry shifted in his seat, attempting a semblance of composure, but Meghan noticed immediately. She leaned closer, whispering a question he didn't answer. Did he dare show weakness in front of the rest of the family? Could he? The stakes weren't just emotional, they were historical. It was more than a private betrayal. The archive wasn't a pile of letters or random trinkets. It represented decades of discretion, power, and the personal confidence the Queen had in her successor. For William, it was a confirmation of his role, a tangible token of trust. For Harry, it was a blunt message: some doors would never reopen. Some legacies would never be shared. And his tone didn't waver. Each word, each pause, was deliberate. She understood the gravity of the revelation, but also the optics, the unspoken message to the others present. The reading wasn't merely a procedural necessity. It was a demonstration of strategy and clarity, a controlled delivery of the Queen's intentions. William's calm demeanor contrasted sharply with Harry's rising tension. The difference wasn't lost on anyone in the room. And the archive itself was not just symbolic. Rumors suggested it contained letters, personal mementos, diaries, and possibly recordings that captured the Queen's unfiltered thoughts. These weren't documents for casual perusal. They were testaments to her judgment, her fears, her values, and her assessment of her children's character. To hold them was to hold insight into the monarchy itself, a power that extended beyond mere inheritance. Harry's mind raced. Could this exclusion be reversed? Could Meghan intervene? Or was this a calculated final act, a message encoded in paper and ink, a reminder that trust must be earned and that even a prince could fall out of favor? The possibilities were endless, and every option carried risk. Meghan's eyes scanned the room, observing reactions. She was acutely aware that any sign of agitation could be interpreted as weakness. But beneath the surface, her mind was a whirlwind of strategies, PR maneuvers, and contingency plans. She knew the media would seize on this, would dissect every reaction. If Harry faltered, if they showed vulnerability, the narrative would shift immediately. They had to be composed, measured, tactical. The courtiers were quietly shifting as well, some making notes, others simply observing. They knew the importance of discretion, but human curiosity was hard to suppress. Whispers of exclusion and archive moved like fire through dry grass, subtle yet persistent. And as these words spread, the tension only grew. Every glance was loaded with speculation, every gesture interpreted as a signal. William, meanwhile, remained serene. Years of preparation had taught him how to carry authority without overt assertion. But even he understood the significance of what Princess Anne had just revealed. This archive was more than sentimental. It was a consolidation of power, a declaration of confidence from the late Queen. And he now bore the responsibility of managing it, knowing that Harry and Meghan's absence was as intentional as it was symbolic. The moment stretched on, seconds feeling like minutes. Anne carefully placed the envelope on the table in front of William, her hand lingering slightly, a silent acknowledgement of the weight of the gesture. Harry and Meghan sat frozen, the full impact beginning to sink in. The Queen had always been meticulous, calculating in her decisions. Every action was measured, every word deliberate. And this exclusion, was no exception. How does a family recover from something so deliberate, so pointed, yet so silent in its execution? That question hovered over the room, unanswered, heavy in the silence that followed. Harry's thoughts were a maelstrom of disbelief, hurt, and simmering anger. Meghan's were more methodical, planning the next move in a chess game that had suddenly become life or death. As Anne stepped back, the room felt emptier, though physically no one had moved. The announcement had left its mark, a quiet but indelible reminder of hierarchy, trust, and the consequences of being left out of the inner circle. This wasn't just about inheritance. It was about control, influence, and legacy. And the family was acutely aware that what they had just witnessed would not remain private for long. The Queen's choices had always been precise. Her decisions about succession, titles, and responsibilities were grounded in careful consideration. And now, through this single act, she had made it unmistakably clear where her trust lay. For Harry, it was a jarring revelation that went beyond disappointment. It was an unspoken rebuke, a reminder that even royalty could be left on the outside. Meghan leaned closer to Harry again, whispering something inaudible. He shook his head slightly, trying to regain composure, though the tremor in his fingers betrayed him. The moment demanded more than emotion. It demanded strategy, silence, and patience. Every expression, every gesture, was now potentially a statement for history. And yet, even in this charged atmosphere, one fact remained undeniable. The confidential family archive was a vault of secrets that could redefine public perception, reveal intimate truths, and possibly change the narrative of the royal family forever. William held the key. Harry and Meghan had only questions, and the world would soon join them in speculation. As the Queen's final words echoed silently through the room, one thought lingered. The archive was more than history. It was leverage, power, and an unspoken reminder that trust must be earned, not assumed. And as Harry and Meghan processed the enormity of what they had just been excluded from, one thing was certain. The coming days would test loyalties, reveal true intentions, and expose hidden fractures that the public had never imagined. The term confidential family archive sounded almost innocuous, like a dusty collection of old letters or family photographs locked away in some forgotten attic. But in the world of royalty, words carry weight, and titles even more. This wasn't just an archive. It was a vault of secrets, a carefully curated repository of personal reflections, intimate communications, and historical documents the Queen had reserved for the heir she trusted most. And that heir was unmistakably William. Harry and Meghan, by contrast, had been left standing outside, staring at the door that had silently closed behind them. What exactly was in this archive? Even the courtiers speculated. Some whispered about letters penned by the Queen herself, private messages to her children and confidants, insights into her decisions that had never been publicly revealed. Others hinted at diaries or journals, detailing conversations with prime ministers, foreign dignitaries, and family members, capturing moments of tension, triumph, and sometimes despair. Rumors even suggested the presence of personal mementos, gifts, photographs, and keepsakes meant to record the humanity behind the crown. Imagine opening a chest that contains decades of your mother's thoughts, the quiet observations of someone who had ruled an entire nation with both rigor and tenderness. Now imagine realizing you had been deliberately excluded from this intimate circle of trust. That was Harry's reality. Meghan understood it too, not just emotionally, but strategically. Every glance, every movement in that room, carried implications far beyond personal sentiment. The archive was described as being physically small, perhaps just a single locked cabinet or a set of folders, but its contents were colossal in significance. Each item represented a piece of the Queen's perception of her family, her assessment of character, loyalty, and reliability. It was less about material wealth and more about trust and legacy, an heirloom of discretion that William had been chosen to steward. And in that choice, the Queen had made a statement that resonated far beyond the walls of Balmoral. Harry's mind raced with questions. Why him? Why exclude him from something so personal and so symbolic? He had served his country, represented the monarchy on countless occasions, and had maintained a public image of loyalty and respect. Yet here he was, consciously left out of what might be considered the most intimate inheritance of the Queen's life. The emotional impact was immediate. A mixture of disbelief, hurt, and growing resentment coursed through him. Meghan, ever attuned to optics and control, noted every flicker of tension. She knew that in the coming hours, every reaction, every whisper, would be scrutinized, both inside the family and by the world. Some insiders suggested that the archive contained letters revealing the Queen's private opinions about her children's roles, responsibilities, and, perhaps, failings. Others claimed it included documentation of sensitive family events that had been concealed from public scrutiny. The mere existence of such a collection suggested a level of planning and forethought that few could appreciate. The Queen had lived a life under constant observation, her every action interpreted and reported. Yet she had managed to maintain secrets even from those closest to her, crafting a legacy that was deliberate, controlled, and remarkably selective. And William, the eldest son and heir, was now its custodian. The responsibility weighed heavily. He understood that what lay within that archive was not merely historical. It could influence the family, affect public perception, and, if mishandled, create scandal. The Queen's trust was absolute, but it came with a burden, discretion, judgment, and the knowledge that revealing too much could destabilize both family and monarchy. Meghan's reaction, though subtler than Harry's, was just as potent. She sensed both opportunity and danger. The exclusion was not merely a personal slight, it was a challenge. How would they respond? Should they confront the family, leak information to the press, or attempt to negotiate access? Each option was fraught with risk, potentially inflaming tensions or exacerbating public scrutiny. Meghan understood that in this situation, timing and narrative control were everything. The archive also carried historical significance. It was said to include letters from past monarchs, personal annotations on royal protocols, and perhaps even reflections on political and familial decisions that had shaped the nation. To hold such knowledge was to possess power, power over perception, over history, and potentially over other family members. The Queen had always been meticulous in her planning. She had understood the importance of legacy and had carefully chosen who would carry it forward. That choice now rested squarely with William, leaving Harry and Meghan outside the circle, scrambling to process the enormity of what had just been revealed. Curiosity about the archive wasn't confined to Harry and Meghan. The courtiers, the staff, and even distant royal relatives felt the weight of the revelation. Speculation was rampant. Could it contain evidence of favoritism, critical judgments of Harry and Meghan's public behavior, or insights into the Queen's private thoughts on her family's divisions? Every rumor added tension. Every whispered theory heightened the drama. The atmosphere in the room was charged, a mixture of reverence, fear, and curiosity. And then there were the implications for the future. The archive's contents, if ever made public, could alter perceptions of the monarchy, redefine historical narratives, and even affect succession planning. William had to navigate these waters carefully. Sharing too much could provoke scandal. Revealing too little could raise questions about transparency. Harry and Meghan, excluded and frustrated, were left to speculate, to wonder, and perhaps to plot. The psychological impact on Harry was profound. Being left out of a family legacy so meticulously curated was more than disappointment. It was a public statement. Trust and discretion were rewarded, but missteps, perceived or real, were remembered. Meghan, ever astute, noted the subtle cues, Harry's tightened jaw, the slight slump in his shoulders, the way his eyes darted toward the envelope, as if hoping to glean insight from its unspoken contents. She knew that understanding the archive without access was a delicate game, one that required both patience and strategy. The Queen's approach had always been calculated. She managed appearances, controlled narratives, and ensured that her decisions were respected without question. The archive was no exception. It represented not only her legacy, but her ultimate judgment, a message about who she trusted to carry forward her intentions. For William, it was validation and burden combined. For Harry, it was exclusion and a stark reminder of the consequences of falling outside the circle of trust. And yet, the archive was more than just a family tool. It symbolized the monarchy itself, authority, discretion, and the delicate balance between public duty and private confidence. To control, it was to influence history. To be excluded was to confront the fragility of one's position, regardless of title or achievements. As the minutes ticked by in the room, the reality settled in. William held a treasure trove of history, insight, and power. Harry had questions, anger, and an acute sense of isolation. Meghan balanced emotion with strategy, recognizing that every word spoken in this room could reverberate beyond its walls. The Queen's archive had done what she had always intended. It reminded everyone of her meticulous planning, her foresight, and the quiet authority she wielded, even after her passing. And while the details of the archive remained largely hidden from view, the knowledge of its existence, the fact that it had been reserved solely for William, created ripples of tension that extended far beyond the walls of Balmoral. Harry and Meghan faced not only the emotional impact of exclusion, but the strategic reality of navigating a family and public life where trust and discretion were now sharply delineated. But what lay inside the archive? Letters? Diaries? Secret recordings? The contents were a mystery, tantalizing and potentially explosive. And the realization that William alone controlled access to these intimate artifacts created a sense of urgency and unease. Harry and Meghan were left to imagine the scope of the Queen's revelations, knowing that some of the answers might never be theirs. The Queen had been deliberate in every choice. Her selection of William as the custodian of this confidential family archive was not just a familial preference, but a calculated statement about trust, legacy, and judgment. And as the room absorbed the weight of this revelation, one undeniable truth became clear. The archive was more than a collection of documents. It was the Queen's final message, a mixture of guidance, judgment, and silent authority. The reading had ended, at least for the public portion. Courtiers murmured quietly, some departing to attend to their duties, while others lingered, exchanging looks that carried more weight than words. But Harry didn't move. He remained seated, staring at the envelope on the table, a physical representation of his exclusion. Meghan's hand rested lightly on his arm, an anchor amid the storm raging inside him. But even her presence couldn't soften the impact. The room outside seemed distant now. The crackle of the fire, the muffled footsteps of staff, even William's calm, measured composure, all of it faded into the background. All that Harry could see, all that he could feel, was the exclusion. The Queen had left a confidential family archive to William. That decision, deliberate and unmistakable, had just reshaped his understanding of trust, legacy, and family loyalty. He felt a tightness in his chest, a familiar knot of frustration and disbelief that had surfaced in previous conflicts. But this was different. This wasn't a disagreement over public appearances, media narratives, or even titles. This was a personal exclusion, the most private kind imaginable, and it hit deeper than any headline or public dispute ever could. Harry clenched his fists, his mind racing. He had served his country, represented the monarchy on countless occasions, and faced challenges that few outside the royal circle could comprehend. And yet, here he was, excluded from the very repository that held his mother's thoughts, her personal legacy, and her intimate assessments of her children. "What am I supposed to do now?" he muttered under his breath, almost to himself. Meghan leaned closer, whispering words of encouragement, caution, and strategy all at once. She knew that showing weakness, even in private, could be interpreted as an opportunity for William and to assert further control over the narrative. She also understood that Harry's emotional state could be leveraged, for better or worse, by those around them. The Queen's decision was deliberate, but its execution was quiet. There were no dramatics, no public condemnation, just the envelope on the table, its contents sealed away, its significance unmistakable. Harry's gaze lingered on it, imagining the letters, diaries, or records that might lie within. What judgments had the Queen passed in private? What assessments had she made about his choices, his behavior, his loyalty? And why had William alone been deemed worthy of access? As he processed the moment, a mixture of emotions surged through him: anger, hurt, disbelief, and a sense of betrayal. He had expected challenges, scrutiny, perhaps even criticism, but nothing had prepared him for the deliberate exclusion from this intimate aspect of his mother's legacy. Meghan sensed the storm within him and knew that every word, every expression, now mattered. Harry rose from his seat, pacing the length of the room, the rhythmic sound of his footsteps echoing like a metronome of tension. Meghan followed, her mind balancing empathy with strategy. She understood that Harry needed space to process, but she also knew that this wasn't just about emotions. It was about narrative control, about anticipating the next move. Every glance they exchanged was charged, a silent acknowledgement of both shared frustration and strategic urgency. He thought back to the moments before the reading, when Princess and had held the envelope with unwavering composure. The precision of her delivery, the careful pauses, and the calm authority had made the impact unavoidable. Every element of the reading had been designed to convey not just the contents of the will, but the intentions behind it. Harry's exclusion wasn't a mistake, it was a statement. A reminder that trust and discretion were earned, measured not in public appearances or titles, but in alignment with the family's expectations. Questions swirled through his mind. Could he challenge this? Should he confront William directly, or seek to understand the rationale behind the decision first? Was there room for negotiation, or was this archive permanently beyond his reach? Every option seemed fraught with risk. Acting too aggressively could provoke criticism or public scandal, while inaction risked reinforcing the perception of vulnerability and exclusion. Meghan, ever calculating, considered the optics. The world would soon learn, intentionally or otherwise, that Harry had been left out. Media speculation would surge, social media would explode with theories, and narratives would begin forming almost immediately. She knew they needed to craft a response, but it had to be measured. Too much emotion, and they risked appearing petulant. Too little, and they might be perceived as weak or powerless. Harry paused at the window, staring out into the Scottish dusk. The rolling hills, the gray sky, and the quiet serenity of Balmoral offered little comfort. Everything felt distant, disconnected from the reality he now faced. He had spent years balancing the expectations of royalty with personal ambition, and yet, in this moment, the ground beneath him seemed to shift. Meghan approached silently, placing a hand on his shoulder. She didn't speak. She didn't need to. The weight of the moment was already understood between them. He returned to the fireplace, hands clasped behind his back, breathing deeply to steady the rising tide of emotion. The archive wasn't just a repository of documents. It was power, influence, and legacy. William held it. He had been trusted with a secret that was both symbolic and tangible, and Harry had been deliberately left out. The implications were staggering. How would this shape future interactions within the family? How would it affect public perception, media narratives, and his own sense of place within the monarchy? The Queen had been deliberate in every choice she made, but this one resonated with particular weight. It was a final assertion of judgment, a reminder that loyalty, discretion, and alignment with family expectations were paramount. For Harry, it was a moment of reckoning, a test of resilience and composure. Meghan understood that, too. The way they navigated the aftermath would set the tone for their personal and public strategy moving forward. And yet, amidst the frustration and uncertainty, a flicker of calculation emerged. Meghan began outlining scenarios, weighing options, considering allies, and anticipating potential leaks or narratives. Harry, still processing, began to consider his response. Could he challenge the decision, question the reasoning, or appeal to William's sense of fairness? Each thought carried risks, each option had consequences, and every decision would be scrutinized by both family and public alike. Hours passed, though time seemed suspended. They remained in the room, the envelope untouched, a silent monument to the Queen's final act of discretion. Harry's emotions oscillated between anger, hurt, and determination. He knew that the exclusion from the archive wasn't just a personal slight. It was a statement about trust, judgment, and the hierarchy of responsibility within the family. Meghan's presence provided a measure of stability, yet even she could not mitigate the magnitude of the Queen's decision. He finally sank into a chair, burying his face in his hands. The world outside could wait. The personal, private ramifications of the exclusion were immediate and undeniable. Meghan sat beside him, whispering questions and guidance, reminding him that every reaction mattered, every choice carried weight. The envelope, the archive, and the knowledge of their exclusion loomed large, a symbol of both power and limitation. And as the night deepened, one realization became painfully clear. This wasn't a temporary setback. The Queen's archive was a lasting legacy, a curated record of trust and discretion, and William held it entirely. Harry and Meghan had been deliberately left outside, forced to confront both the emotional sting and the strategic reality of exclusion. But the story didn't end there. The reactions, the decisions, and the next moves would ripple outward, setting in motion a chain of events that could redefine family dynamics, public perception, and even the monarchy itself. And the world would soon witness how the excluded heirs, furious and unsettled, would respond to a secret legacy they were never meant to access. What Harry would do next, and how Meghan would act in tandem, would mark the beginning of a new chapter in royal history, one fraught with tension, secrecy, and the looming shadow of a confidential archive that promised to hold truths no one outside the room had yet glimpsed. But what they didn't know was that even within the confines of that room, unseen forces and whispers had already begun moving. Forces that would make the consequences of the Queen's deliberate exclusion far more immediate, far more personal, and far more explosive than either of them could imagine. The moment Harry's jaw had tightened, Meghan's mind had already shifted into overdrive. While Harry grappled with the sting of exclusion, Meghan saw the situation in starkly different terms. As a chessboard where every piece, every move, could shape perception, power, and ultimately, control. She understood instinctively that this wasn't just a personal slight. It was an opportunity, a crisis, and a strategic puzzle all at once. From the moment Princess Anne had uttered the words, "confidential family archive," entrusted solely to Prince William, Meghan's mind had been racing. She wasn't just thinking about the emotional implications for Harry. She was thinking about optics, narrative, leverage, and the global stage. The exclusion was deliberate, yes, but how would it resonate beyond these walls? How would the public perceive it? And most importantly, how could they respond in a way that protected their reputation while maintaining some semblance of influence over a narrative that had suddenly been rewritten? Meghan leaned closer to Harry, whispering questions that were part comfort, part subtle interrogation. "Did you notice William's expression?" she asked softly. There was a moment there, just a flicker, when he almost looked guilty. Or was it something else? Harry didn't answer immediately. His mind was still occupied with the personal sting, the sense of betrayal. But Meghan didn't wait for a response. She knew the next steps had to be swift, deliberate, and carefully measured. She began to assess their position. First, the optics. How would the press interpret this exclusion if it leaked? Social media speculation would erupt within minutes, and stories of sibling rivalry, palace drama, and favoritism would flood the news cycle. Meghan's instinct told her that framing the narrative quickly was crucial. Silence would be dangerous. Inaction could be interpreted as weakness, indecision, or guilt. Every second of hesitation amplified risk. Next, the strategic angle. Could this exclusion be leveraged? If they couldn't access the archive, could knowledge of its existence alone be turned into an advantage? Meghan considered the possibilities. Insinuation, hinting at omissions, suggesting that the archive contained truths that Harry had a right to see. She knew how to manipulate curiosity, how to plant seeds of speculation that would spread like wildfire without ever confirming anything. The Queen's secrecy worked in their favor here, if wielded correctly. Her mind also turned to allies. People inside the palace, courtiers who had long-standing loyalties, and media figures who might be sympathetic. Every whisper could be amplified. Every subtle hint could become a story that shifted the balance of power. Meghan thought of this as a game of influence. Indirect, invisible, but devastatingly effective if played correctly. Harry's raw emotion could be channeled, directed into careful statements, carefully timed reactions, subtle gestures. All choreographed to maximize impact without overstepping. But Meghan also understood the risks. Acting too aggressively could backfire, provoke William, or expose their intentions. Acting too subtly could mean losing the moment entirely. Precision was key. She considered the timing of interactions, the potential leaks to the press, and the framing of conversations with family members. Every detail mattered: tone of voice, eye contact, facial expressions. She observed Harry's reactions closely, noting which gestures or words betrayed his inner turmoil, knowing these would inform her strategy. Meanwhile, the archive itself remained an enigmatic force. Meghan didn't know the exact contents, but she could infer its power. Letters, diaries, personal items, all curated by the Queen herself, were now in William's hands. This wasn't just about sentimental value. It was authority, insight, and leverage. For Meghan, the challenge was clear. She had to protect Harry from emotional damage while simultaneously preparing for a battle of influence that could extend far beyond these walls. She considered the media carefully. Even a subtle leak, framed correctly, could serve multiple purposes. It could generate sympathy, create pressure, or even destabilize assumptions about family dynamics. She mentally cataloged who might be receptive, who might sensationalize, and who could be trusted to deliver nuance. Every interaction could be a move in a larger strategy. Meghan's mind worked with a precision born of experience, not as an actor, not as a celebrity, but as someone who understood the mechanics of influence, persuasion, and narrative control. Harry, still reeling, noticed her focus. At first, he felt relief that she was thinking clearly, that she was working to protect him. But then came the unease. The realization that Meghan was already several steps ahead, planning moves that he hadn't even considered. His emotions, raw and unfiltered, contrasted sharply with her calculated approach. And yet, despite the friction, he trusted her judgment implicitly. She had always been able to see angles he could not, to anticipate consequences before they materialized. And so, while he processed hurt and disbelief, Meghan began to act. She controlled her own expressions carefully, sending signals to the staff, to Harry, and to anyone observing that she was composed, collected, and in command. A single raised eyebrow, a subtle nod, a controlled shift in posture. Every gesture communicated both strength and strategy. This was not mere poise. It was deliberate signaling, part of a broader approach to managing both perception and reality. Meghan's thoughts also extended to the long game. This exclusion was not an isolated incident. It was part of a pattern, a culmination of years of family dynamics, media scrutiny, and public expectations. The archive was symbolic of power, trust, and legacy, and being excluded had far-reaching implications. She needed to consider how this would affect Harry's position, their public image, and potential leverage in private conversations. Every detail mattered. Every timing of words and actions could tilt the balance. She noticed how Harry's fists clenched subtly, how his gaze flicked repeatedly to the envelope. The archive wasn't just a physical object, it was a psychological weapon. By controlling access, William effectively dictated the boundaries of trust and knowledge within the family. Meghan understood this instantly, and as she considered their next moves, she balanced empathy with pragmatism. Harry's emotional response had to be acknowledged, but it could also be harnessed strategically. Hours passed with quiet deliberation. Meghan whispered, advised, and occasionally, without saying a word, redirected Harry's focus. She mapped scenarios in her mind. Conversations with William, discussions with, and the possibility of leaks, media reaction, and public perception. She assessed risk versus reward at every step, understanding that one misstep could result in public humiliation or private defeat. She also prepared for contingency. If the archive became public, how would they respond? How could they frame it in a way that protected their narrative, emphasized their loyalty, and highlighted the Queen's wisdom without exposing vulnerability? She envisioned every scenario, every question, every headline that could emerge. Meghan had always been methodical. Now, that methodical approach was essential. By the end of the evening, Harry was calmer but still tense, processing the exclusion and its emotional ramifications. Meghan, on the other hand, had formulated multiple strategies, contingency plans, and narrative approaches. She had already begun controlling what she could control: appearances, messaging, and preparation for both private and public interactions. Her mind never rested, moving ahead, anticipating consequences, and ensuring that neither she nor Harry would be caught unprepared. And yet, even as she worked, Meghan could sense the underlying tension that no strategy could immediately resolve. The Queen's deliberate choice to exclude Harry from the archive had set off a chain reaction that could redefine family dynamics, public perception, and even Harry's understanding of his place in the royal legacy. The weight of that moment would linger, affecting not only the immediate family, but also the wider monarchy and the public's perception of it for years to come. But what Meghan didn't know, even in her careful calculations, was that Princess and had anticipated their reactions, foreseen their strategies, and quietly prepared for every potential move. The stakes were higher than anyone could imagine, and the real challenge was only beginning. The envelope had been opened, the words read, and the room had settled into an uneasy silence. But the question lingering in every mind was unavoidable. Why William? Why had the Queen entrusted her most intimate family legacy to him alone? In the realm of monarchy, such decisions are never arbitrary. Every action, every choice, carries layers of meaning, history, and foresight. The Queen's selection of William as custodian of the confidential family archive was deliberate, symbolic, and deeply instructive, reflecting not only trust but a nuanced understanding of character, responsibility, and loyalty. William had always been groomed for leadership, but leadership in the royal family is more than title or public image. It is judgment, discretion, and the ability to bear both public scrutiny and private responsibility without faltering. From an early age, he had demonstrated a keen understanding of balance between duty and personal inclination, between tradition and adaptation. The Queen had watched him develop these qualities over decades, observing how he navigated crises, supported family members, and engaged with the public. Her decision reflected years of observation, insight, and calculation. For Harry, this was a bitter pill to swallow. He had been praised for courage, charisma, and public service, yet here he faced an undeniable truth. His reliability in the eyes of the Queen, particularly in matters of discretion, was deemed insufficient for the guardianship of her private legacy. Meghan, ever strategic, recognized that this exclusion was not simply an emotional slight. It was a statement of principle, a reflection of the Queen's expectations of responsibility and trustworthiness. The archive itself was a repository of power. It contained documents that could reveal truths, insights, and judgments previously hidden from public knowledge. Letters to family members, reflections on political and social events, private assessments of relationships, and perhaps even directives for the future were likely included. Possessing the archive was a tangible symbol of the Queen's confidence in an individual's ability to manage not only the family legacy, but the potential repercussions of exposing, interpreting, or safeguarding sensitive information. William had demonstrated, consistently, that he could manage that responsibility. But the selection process was not merely about capability, it was also about temperament. The Queen had understood, perhaps better than anyone, that emotional volatility can be an obstacle to discretion. She had seen Harry navigate personal grief, public scrutiny, and intense media pressure with varying degrees of success. While Harry's passions and instincts were admirable in many ways, they could also lead to impulsive decisions. In matters of family legacy, where discretion is paramount, the Queen may have concluded that William's temperament was more aligned with the careful stewardship required by the archive. This was not a condemnation of Harry's character. It was a deliberate choice rooted in prudence and foresight. Moreover, the Queen's decision reflected her understanding of family dynamics. William had always been positioned as a stabilizing force within the household, someone capable of bridging public expectation and private familial duty. Entrusting him with the archive was an acknowledgement that he could protect the family's privacy while honoring the significance of her personal legacy. It was a recognition of his ability to navigate complex relationships without allowing emotion or pride to undermine responsibility. Harry, of course, perceived this differently. The exclusion felt like a personal rebuke, a public and private reminder that his role in the family hierarchy was conditional, contingent, and perhaps less secure than he had imagined. Meghan recognized the emotional weight of this realization and sought to mediate, offering both support and strategy. She knew that Harry's initial reaction, if poorly managed, could escalate tensions or inadvertently reveal vulnerabilities. Her approach was calm, calculating, and measured, contrasting with the intensity of Harry's internal storm. The Queen's choice also spoke to historical precedents and the continuity of tradition. Throughout the monarchy's history, the custodianship of private documents, personal letters, and sensitive information has often been assigned to the heir or a trusted senior family member. These choices are not symbolic alone. They are functional, ensuring that information is managed responsibly, that sensitive revelations do not compromise the institution, and that trust is maintained across generations. William fit this role, not merely as the eldest son, but as someone whose track record demonstrated reliability, judgment, and discretion. Yet the implications of this decision were multifaceted. For Harry, it was not just about exclusion. It was about recognition, or rather, the absence of recognition. Meghan observed how he processed this dual blow. The personal slight, combined with the awareness that William now held not only a symbolic position of trust, but tangible control over potentially transformative family secrets. The emotional weight was profound, and Meghan understood that it needed to be managed with care. As the family reconvened in private moments, whispers and glances carried layers of subtext. Courtiers noted the tension between the brothers, but even more, they recognized the deliberate nature of the Queen's choice. This was not a matter of oversight or error. It was a calculated act, a culmination of decades of observation and decision-making. Harry's exclusion was intentional, and the consequences would ripple through the family, affecting perceptions, dynamics, and strategies for years to come. William himself understood the responsibility he had been entrusted with. The archive was not merely a collection of documents. It was a manifestation of the Queen's judgment, her trust, and her expectations. Handling it required discretion, prudence, and a sensitivity to both family and public perception. The weight of these items, symbolic and literal, pressed heavily upon him, and he recognized that any misstep could carry consequences far beyond the personal realm. The Queen's decision also reflected her understanding of leverage and influence. By entrusting William with the archive, she ensured that control over sensitive information remained within a channel she deemed secure. It was a safeguard, a measure to preserve the integrity of her legacy while acknowledging the realities of human behavior. For Harry, this meant navigating not only emotional disappointment, but the recognition that access to family secrets was contingent upon measured trust, proven discretion, and alignment with expectations set decades earlier. From Meghan's perspective, the situation required careful navigation. She understood the need to support Harry emotionally while also preparing for strategic responses. Any direct confrontation or public disclosure could exacerbate tensions or create unintended consequences. Every conversation, every gesture, and every public interaction needed to be considered through the lens of narrative control, media optics, and family dynamics. Her approach was methodical, anticipating both internal and external reactions with precision. The selection of William also served as a subtle but undeniable statement about the hierarchy of trust within the royal family. It demonstrated that positions of responsibility were not automatically granted, regardless of public service, personal charisma, or familial connection. They were earned through consistent demonstration of judgment, discretion, and alignment with the values the Queen held most dear. William's role as custodian of the archive reinforced the principle that trust, once granted, carries both privilege and accountability. Yet the emotional resonance of the decision could not be understated. Harry's initial shock evolved into a complex interplay of hurt, reflection, and simmering determination. Meghan remained at his side, guiding, supporting, and calculating. She understood the importance of timing, the necessity of measured responses, and the potential consequences of overreaction. Together, they navigated a landscape shaped by history, expectation, and deliberate familial strategy. And even as the day waned, the implications of the Queen's choice continued to unfold. The archive was more than a symbol of personal trust. It was a strategic asset, a repository of judgment, insight, and discretion. Entrusting it to William ensured that the knowledge it contained would be handled responsibly, yet its existence also cast a shadow over Harry and Meghan, highlighting both their exclusion and the consequences of perceived misalignment with the family's values. But the story didn't end there. While the decision itself was deliberate, the ripples it created extended beyond the walls of Balmoral. Questions lingered. What exactly was in the archive? How would William handle its contents? Would Harry ever have access? Could Meghan influence the narrative in their favor? The answers remained tantalizingly out of reach, promising tension, strategy, and drama in the chapters to come. And as Harry and Meghan contemplated the significance of the Queen's choice, one undeniable truth emerged. This was a turning point, a calculated act that reshaped the family dynamic, clarified the hierarchy of trust, and set the stage for a series of events that would test loyalty, judgment, and discretion in ways no one could yet foresee. But what Harry and Meghan didn't realize was that the archive contained more than letters and documents. It held secrets that could redefine the story of their family, and the moment they discovered its true content would change everything. The moment Princess Anne read the Queen's final words aloud, the courtiers around the room felt a subtle shift in atmosphere. Some had been present for decades, witnessing generations of royal ceremonies, private gatherings, and high-stakes decisions. But even for the most seasoned staff, the announcement of the confidential family archive being entrusted solely to Prince William created a ripple of unease that could not be ignored. The Queen's choice was deliberate, calculated, and, for many, shocking in its implications. Whispers began almost immediately, quiet and careful, yet impossible to fully suppress. Eyes darted toward Harry and Meghan, assessing reactions, reading tension, and noting every subtle flicker of emotion. Some of the older servants exchanged looks steeped in history, recognizing that they were witnessing not just a personal slight, but a statement about hierarchy, trust, and responsibility within the royal household. Even without being told, they understood that Harry's exclusion was intentional, and they sensed the gravity of the moment. In the corners of the room, aides and secretaries began to murmur among themselves, choosing words carefully. "It's deliberate," one whispered under her breath. The Queen knew exactly what she was doing. Another, a young clerk who had joined the household recently, nodded, her face pale. "William, he's been entrusted with everything." "Harry, not even a glance." The words, though quiet, carried an electric tension, spreading among those present. The reactions of the courtiers were not merely about curiosity. They were about survival, observation, and understanding the subtleties of a household governed by centuries of protocol. Every gesture, every expression, was analyzed and catalogued. Some whispered theories about the contents of the archive: letters, diaries, personal notes, historical records, possibly recordings of private conversations with world leaders. Every hypothesis carried implications. Every conjecture held the potential to shift alliances or alter perceptions within the palace walls. Harry sat stiffly, the envelope's significance weighing on him, while Meghan's mind raced. They had long understood that the eyes of the staff were never idle, that whispers and subtle observations could be as impactful as formal decisions. Now, those eyes and ears were cataloging their reactions, ready to interpret and report. For Meghan, this was both a challenge and an opportunity. The private realm of the royal household was alive with speculation, and careful management could allow them to influence perception even before the archive's contents became public knowledge. Some courtiers had seen Harry handle challenges in the past: public scrutiny, media scandals, and ceremonial pressure, and they noted the contrast between his composed public face and his private tension now. Meghan, as always, was alert to these dynamics. She understood that controlling appearances, even subtly, was key to managing influence. A flicker of a smile, a controlled sigh, or a deliberate pause could all be interpreted as messages, both within the family and among the staff. Meanwhile, long-serving household members were quietly discussing the implications of the Queen's choice. "She's always been precise," one whispered. "She trusts William with everything, and she trusts and to deliver it correctly. Harry, not so much." Another added, "It's not just about capability, it's about judgment." The Queen knew what she was doing, and executed it perfectly. The courtiers also noted the psychological impact on Harry and Meghan. Exclusion from a family legacy, particularly one as intimate as the confidential archive, was a blow that combined personal hurt with professional and public implications. Staff members recognized the careful balance between private pain and public composure, understanding that any misstep could create a ripple effect beyond the walls of Balmoral. Some whispers turned to speculation about long-term consequences. "Do you think Harry will try to challenge it?" one asked. "Or Meghan?" Another, more experienced, shook her head. "Not directly. This is a subtle message from the Queen. The timing, the delivery, everything is calculated. Any overt challenge would backfire. Yet not all reactions were silent. A few more outspoken aides noted the tension openly. "Harry's face says everything," one muttered. "You can see the frustration, the shock. Meghan's calm is strategic, but it's obvious she's planning something." These observations were shared quietly, in hushed tones, careful not to overstep boundaries, but impossible to fully suppress. Some courtiers began connecting dots from the past. They recalled moments when Harry had been tested, when his judgment had been questioned, when public perception had highlighted vulnerabilities. By comparing those past incidents with the present exclusion, they speculated that the Queen had made a decision not merely based on sentiment, but on consistent patterns of behavior, discretion, and trustworthiness. For Meghan, these whispered assessments were not just background noise. They were data points, providing insight into how the household perceived them, what narratives were already forming, and how future interactions could be anticipated. She recognized that the courtiers' interpretations could be leveraged, subtly influencing the story even before the media became involved. As the evening continued, tension remained palpable. Staff members moved carefully, aware that their observations and whispers could later be scrutinized or recalled in formal or informal discussions. Harry and Meghan were the center of this silent theater, each reaction noted, each pause interpreted, even small gestures. A tightening of the jaw, a shift in seating, a glance at William, carried disproportionate weight. The courtiers' whispers also revealed unspoken anxieties. Some feared that the exclusion signaled a shift in the internal hierarchy, a reminder that access to legacy, power, and privilege was contingent on trust and alignment with family expectations. Others worried